Like the next time I want to watch Scanners, I don't care how available this is how I want to watch it. Like this is how this movie, in my memory and in my mind, needs to be seen. I don't need it in 4K. I do need it on video. And, you know, mileage may vary on that, but that's my opinion, and I got to put this together, so you're in my house now.
Hello, I'm Mia Vicino with Letterboxd. We are here at Kim's Video Underground in Lower Manhattan, and we are going to give you a tour. Come on.
At its peak, ultimately, it had somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 55,000 videos available. We estimate today that was about 2/3 tapes and 1/3 DVDs. The average supply of any given Blockbuster would have 10,000 movies. So this little vestibule here in the middle, if you could imagine it spaced out one movie at a time, would be the size of a Blockbuster. Our goal here is to create like a curated selection. Because obviously if I say there's 40,000 tapes, like right off the top, you can imagine 20,000 of those are the most ubiquitously common and available movies that any store would have had. So we have to say goodbye to those and put them back into storage. And then there's this huge middle ground of like, we don't know if this is rare, has this fallen out of circulation? And then what we're really looking for is the gems of like, I don't even know what this is. And we just are looking at things and saying, what is this? What has happened to this movie? We don't know where this lives. This is clearly out of circulation. So to make this space sort of what Kim's was, which is like, I don't know what this is, but I'm interested in it, rather than this is just stuff that I'm familiar with. Because we wanted to create something that was like really tailored towards discovery and the joy of going to a video store, which largely doesn't exist anymore, and certainly not in New York. Making something that for customers is not about, oh, I love this movie, I want to revisit it, but more about like this store represented a space where you would find things that you didn't otherwise know existed. You would find things that the clerk had to recommend. You would find things that maybe would continue your education if you were seeing films in New York at repertory theaters and you wanted to take that viewing home with you, see other films by the sort of auteurs that were having retrospectives, but maybe there's a rare movie that they couldn't screen, but maybe Kim's had a bootleg of it. So we wanted to create this space here that represents that sort of scarcity of titles and the thrill of discovery, because one thing we all know now, right? Like we've been video store people like us, we've been saying this for years, like this myth, everything's available. Streaming, you can get anything. We all know that's not true. And now the public are really starting to catch on to that. But basically for the last 10 years, people have accepted, like you can find anything on streaming. People really did believe that for a while. And to say we have 3,000 tapes out and 10,000 DVDs, like that's all, 13,000 movies here is like, that's a substantial amount. That's more than almost any streaming service would have. And we've really tried to select movies that people can say like, I don't really know where else to find this. So a lot of what we do, we're always looking stuff up and saying like, wow, I can't believe that this movie never made it to Blu-ray, or maybe even never made it to DVD. And certainly it's not streaming. But it's really like, if this is inaccessible and we can make it accessible, then we must do that. And we must offer it to people. And the rentals are free for 7 days. Yeah, you have to pay to rent a VCR if you don't have one, but I feel like you should have one by now.
So the thrill of discovery, that's kind of part of what Letterboxd is doing, is helping people discover new films. So I'm wondering, is Kim's Video Underground on Letterboxd? And if not, how can we fix that?
I would love to do that, because what we're doing is like, we're realistic. We do know that even in the ecosystem of New York, it might not be convenient to come down here. So we're not only saying this is a resource for, like I said, we're at 13,000 now. Hopefully we could make it to 20,000 ultimately. That's really great for people who can access it, but a lot of what I want to do with the Instagram, and we're starting to shoot videos where people come and kind of select things to talk about. And something like this is like, now we live in a world where like you could enjoy Kim's without even coming in here, right? You could enjoy our collection via videos we'll share of people and nerds and actors and celebrities who came to the store, who are our friends coming in, looking at the boxes I choose to highlight on Instagram or something like that, where people could kind of just browse the collection. I do think we're going to have a lot of stuff that probably doesn't even have a page. Really? A couple of times I've brought something home that's not available, and I've watched it, and these movies that there's just no information about really online. I would like to find stuff that's not on Letterboxd, but then maybe you'd have to add them. That's just because we have like experimental stuff. We have a lot of tapes of shorts. We have stuff that was like clearly given to us by the filmmakers, like New York independent underground movies. So there is a world where like the discovery would kind of be like a ping pong, where it's like you have to make a page for people to know it's there. But yeah, let's do it. I mean, someone has to make, a list of 15,000 movies, but sure. I mean, if they want to do that, or make an account. Once we get over into like some of the weirdo sections, you'll have a better sense of like, I don't really see that kind of thing like popping up so often. But like even right here, we're standing in front of the section that we made called Downtown. Kim's was on St. Mark's Place between 2nd and 3rd, and we started to realize that a lot of what we had represented that 90s, early 2000s version of New York art community. And a lot of these movies that we're putting in this downtown section are things that downtown performance art documentaries. I mean, chief among those would be Nick Zed stuff, right? Like you could both tell me how present Nick Zed is on Letterboxd, but Nick Zed was a staple of Kim's and even a customer, and there were people I worked with who were in Nick Zed movies. So Nick Zed is like inextricably linked from the downtown New York art community of the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s. No one knows this anymore. I mean, nerds and maniacs will, of course, know Nick Zed, who died a couple years ago, sadly. But in terms of like above ground cult movies, he's just not part of the conversation anymore. And the answer for that always is access, right? Anything that's accessible will have a life. If something's not accessible, it's very, very difficult for it to have even a cult following. There's a body of work of Nick Zed that is like there for discovery. Transgressive, black and white, New York underground filmmaking. Incredible stuff. Indelible. And it's not that it's become unknown, because you could sell out a screening here in New York of his works, and I think there were several after he died. But it's that if someone doesn't say to the next generation, these kinds of downtown art films were so important and still are, then they just don't know. Like we have, like I see here, 2 Lydia Lunch tapes. Like we just have so much. Like she's still famous. She's still very well known. But something like this, Live at the Largo in Los Angeles, like there might have been a clip of this in the recent Beth B. Lydia Lunch documentary, which obviously introduced her to audiences in a new way because that movie was very accessible. But that doesn't mean that all of these performance tapes of hers are as well known as they should be. Who's to say how accessible something like that is? And we just kind of want to make those available.
I want to see how many logs Geek Maggot Bingo has on Letterboxd. Should I guess? I guess if I had to guess, low hundreds. Low hundreds. Okay. I was right. 514. Richard Hell? I didn't know that. That's so cool. Most popular is They Eat Scum.
Sure.
With 581
but that's like
logs.
That's very few.
No, it's very few.
Like we probably rented these Nick Zed tapes over 500 times. Right? Like those were staples. Yeah. So that's very few. I mean, it's great that the word is out, but like that doesn't really like the word is not out if those are the numbers.
That's the most popular.
Yeah. This is a cult movie in New York. This would play well, but Sleepwalk. This is directed by Sarah Driver, who has been Jim Jarmusch's partner for as long as they've been making movies, and I think he actually shot this movie according to this sticker that someone wrote on here. But this is a great film, and I feel like when this started popping up in New York at repertory screenings like a decade or so ago, this is just this portrait of a bygone 80s downtown. Kim's was famous for its highly idiosyncratic categories, as many video stores are and always have been. This is the cult section, which is obviously the kind of thing Kim's would have been known for. Real odd, esoteric films that at the time maybe were a little bit more common. Now are the sorts of things that you just might not find anywhere else. This Jodorowsky movie that everybody hates, it's like a deeply unpopular film. One of the movies he made kind of in the wilderness period after El Topo and Holy Mountain. These other Jodorowsky movies were always really important to us because obviously he was a beloved cult filmmaker and you couldn't see his other films anywhere. I mean, you couldn't really see El Topo and Holy Mountain anywhere either for a while. But even when those became more available, Tusk and The Rainbow Thief, which we have somewhere around here, these weren't as accessible. And then our cult section, here's another great one that we had to put out. So Pound, this Robert Downey Sr. movie, which we saw featured briefly in the Chris Smith Downey Jr. doc, Sr., because this is Downey Jr.'s screen debut. He plays a dog in it. It's all humans playing animals. Still not available in any remarkable way, even though in that doc it was presented in like a new 2K transfer. So that obviously exists. But that kind of underground filmmaking was the sort of thing that the Kim's cult section would always really have a lot of. You know, Mark Rappaport, he's got a reputation. Like the Journals of Gene Seberg, have you seen this?
Yes.
20 years ago, he was just one of those filmmakers who had a small reputation. Now that reputation's gotten even smaller. We also love stuff like, I mean, this Emmanuel movie, we should move back over to sexploitation. I don't know why that's in cult, but that should be over in the sexploitation section. We'll move that back. But, you know, like trauma films, like no one under the age of 25 knows anything about trauma now, which is a huge loss. And no video store would have not had a robust trauma shelf. You see, this is from the trauma section. And a lot of those movies are on DVD. They've continued to be around, but you don't see trauma movies if you're just scrolling on streaming. You can just see our trauma here. Blondes have more guns. We just had a lot of it, as any store would have, because they were cheap.
Question for the culture. Is cruising cult?
We like the history of remembering a time where that would have been a harder Friedkin movie to see, where everyone would come in with The Exorcist or To Live and Die in LA, and then you would have to direct them towards Cruising or Sorcerer. Now it's impossible to imagine, but those were not well-known movies or well-liked at all. So we just kind of put out some of these things to remember, like, oh yeah, like Cruising was quite under the radar, or at least reviled even for a while. And now people accept it as like one of his probably 4 or 5 greatest films. So we put some stuff out just to kind of remember how far we've come. Kim's really would have made a lot of people happy by offering these kinds of esoteric, uncanonized films that we're really trying to make more visually available to people. Like, you can't stream Black Snake. I'd be surprised if that movie was on Blu-ray. I'm guessing it's not, or else we wouldn't have put it out. And we have a bunch of other Russ Meyer tapes, and you see how well loved this is. Because these movies have never been available, and these were directly from him. These were self-distributed. So you had to have an independent store to get these. And, you know, this is just a well-loved tape from a time that you would only get a Russ Meyer movie at a place like Kim's. And now I don't know where you would get one. A staple of video stores, mainstream or non-mainstream, would always be sort of like the garbage thriller section. Like B movies, these sort of maybe direct-to-video things, like you've seen The Stepford Wives, but now you should see The Stepford Husbands. Like direct-to-video movies, or maybe movies that were made for cable that received a video release. And to me, that really does suggest, like, that is a video store section. It's just like trash thrillers that sometimes you just want. Like now we would find those on cable or streaming, but like just having a lot of thrillers is very important. And of course we had a lot of them. This is clearly important. The horror section in any video store. If I had my druthers, this would be substantially larger, but space is what it is. We'll build it out a little bit. But, of course, VHS horror was incredibly popular and remains popular to this day. Huge fan base communities still watching and loving horror movies on videotape. And this has been a lot of fun to put together. It was really fun for me to get to really have a lot of my Halloween viewing be from this section this past year, where I suddenly had access to a lot of great horror films that I would not have thought of. And maybe some of them are available otherwise, but maybe not. And that's kind of beside the point, because if I'm watching something like this is kind of how I want to watch it. Animation is one of these categories that's like, this is what I'm saying, where I don't know how you would log some of these, because these are almost all compilations of things. I don't know what you would do with Animation Celebration Video Collection Volume 2. You know, this used to be a real kind of video staple, was these sorts of things, and we're finding that a lot of this stuff is just basically gone from circulation and maybe kind of unsearchable, like unloggable. Like maybe there's one well-known film on each one of these tapes, but that doesn't mean that the best of MTV liquid television with these kind of like early quote-unquote trippy, you know, graphics, this thing meant to appeal to stone college kids. Like, it's kind of hard to know how to search for that, if that sort of material is even available at all. So this wall here, this goes from music to queer to documentary to experimental, which this kind of, you see that this wall is improbably dense. We already have run out of space and we have so much more to go. And that's because there's really nothing that we found that there's more lapses in access than documentary and queer cinema, which is very strange because you don't think of queer cinema as being like underrepresented in the culture or in the canon. But what we found is that throughout the 80s and 90s, there were so many independent distributors of, for example, queer cinema and documentaries, that the rights certainly have become a mess. And we're finding with so many of these films that like, they're just gone. And you hear these things now, like independent movies from the 80s and 90s, the filmmaker could barely get them finished, much less store their materials properly. That's what they're talking about. So we're finding, like, weirdly, the vast majority of the queer films that we look up are just not available at all. And we're sort of finding this completely parallel history of queer cinema based on the fact that independent releasing companies would have reached out to independent stores to stock those films. And it's been really fun to try to imagine scholars of the genre or just fans coming and being like, I don't know any of these movies. And I thought that this was known to me because a lot of these might just not be available. And similar for documentary, I mean, that's the kind of thing that not only do we have a lot of bootlegs here, but this is the kind of thing that would have just dripped in and out of circulation, up to and including the present. Like, here's a movie that was in the news last week. This is Todd Phillips' Frat House. And this was being spoken of recently by someone who was involved with it, I think, like at a film festival. And this was his sort of banned documentary that he made that won a prize at Sundance, winner of this grand jury prize, nonfiction. And then it was never broadcast. So I'd always heard about this. This would turn up in lists of like unavailable movies. And then Kim's had this tape of it. And it's a bootleg. Yeah. But the sticker on the front says it doesn't look good. I think this tape looks very good. And I just remember watching this and thinking, like, now we have access to something that's not available otherwise. Now it's on YouTube. I suspect that it probably has quite a few logs if you look it up. But regardless, the documentary section is the kind of thing that, like, at the time, yeah, that would have been important. Now, looking back at what we're finding, it's like this stuff is essential because so much of this is dubiously released or was officially released but now is not available in any other way. And then music, of course, is the kind of thing that music rights are the most infamously slippery, right? Like, you lose the rights to a song, then the movie can't get put out on video. So much of the music stuff, not only is it just fun to have to remember a time before YouTube, but, a lot of these are just not easily accessible in any remarkable way because why would they be? Like, who would bother to put out a concert film of Stevie Nicks or Kate Bush? But the sort of, for us, like the joy of finding these concert films was really a big part of the video store experience. And there's so many tapes that just say Beatles, including the new Disney film Let It Be, which, this is as bootleggy as it gets. But for decades, the only way to see this would be at a place like Kemp's before Disney decided to restore it 50 years later. So international films, obviously that's a very broad term. And the other side of the shelf, we have country sections. But this is the sort of thing that some of these, the lack of availability is really shocking to us. Like, you could take a New Yorker Video, right? Familiar logo to anyone who spent a lot of time in stores. It's a safe bet that if we pull a tape out and it's a New Yorker Video release, it's not on Blu-ray, it's not streaming, 50% chance it's rare. Even most recently, probably the most famous New Yorker Video tape, Mother and the Horror, which is on Criterion now since April 1st. That was never available on DVD. And that kind of speaks to the general sense of New Yorker slipperiness of the rights. This is a great example I just wanted to highlight of access. So this is a Merchant Ivory film.
Yes.
We all know Merchant Ivory. And my wife and I are big fans of Merchant Ivory. Something I've learned is that there's like a 15 film run of Merchant Ivory movies that are just not available anymore. What? This entire middle period after the early ones, like Bombay Talkie, and then kind of up to like Quartet and some of the 80s ones, there's like this late 70s, early 80s run of Merchant Ivory films that were on DVD but are now not on Blu-ray and not on streaming. And this is one of them. This movie Roseland with Christopher Walken is another one. And those movies have just fallen out of circulation. And Sean, when we were doing it, was like, this is common, and I was like, hang on. Those movies are not available and I've been wanting to see those. So I need to rent that because you can't see Jane Austen in Manhattan, and I thought it was a really good movie. And I wanted to use it as an example of, like, no one would say, like, oh, Merchant Ivory movies, those are rare. But they are, like, that's the thing, you never know. You never know what's, like, in and out of streaming. What's being restored for Blu-ray and coming next year versus what's never coming. So that's kind of, like, the project we try to do down here. It's just, like, make all this a living thing again. And, maybe we'll succeed. this is our workroom, right? This is what the public doesn't see. This is where all of the magic happens. So basically, like I said, 650 boxes was the number. And those were all boxes. This one's actually larger than most of them. They were all actually this size, this kind of mid-size box. And so basically there's three things you would find. You would find a tape with no artwork. That's one box. You would find a video box with no movie.
Oh.
And in the case of Jan Michael Vincent in Hit List, that might be something you want to keep. And then the other thing you'll find sometimes is like a movie that is kept inside a clamshell, which means it's a freebie. Which means like we don't have to match it because they already did that. None of the tools that they use for video stores, like the things to remove these, exist anymore. That's actually right over there. So we had to like source those. You get a nice. So we had to get all these things.
I ain't touch anything.
Happens all the time. And, you know, in order to remove these, we had to get these tools that don't really exist anymore. And actually, the magnetic thing that removes the inner protective circle from DVDs disappeared for like 6 months. So everything here will be out for rent within a matter of time. And this is the process that we have had to go through to bring Kim's back to New York. And we do it gladly in exchange for Dr. Pepper and French fries.